Okie doke. Well, welcome everybody. Just to get myself oriented here, I know Vince, you had just sent through some photos there that maybe I'll have you share in just a little bit of your install because that looked pretty cool. But or I can share them from here if that's easier.
Sure.
But I wanted to touch on a couple of items. Did Bob, do you have anything you want to bring up this meeting? Yeah, you're on mute. You're on mute, Bob.
I have a call coming in from a mortgage company, so I may have to leave you for a little bit. But I do want to talk about flat roof solar installs on industrial buildings.
Yeah.
And this is basically a metal truss roofs with layment and asphalt on top of it and stuff like that.
Okay, so we may as well address that at the moment. What was your question?
How do you do it?
How do you do it? Well,
very carefully, right?
Yeah, there are a couple of different options, but the one that's done most prevalently is a ballasted system, you know, where you buy a designed, engineered system. Iron Ridge, I know you've worked with Iron Ridge before, they have a ballasted system as well. And so you don't actually put any penetrations in through the roof decking because flat roofs are notorious for leaking. So if you start drilling holes, that just is going to cause all sorts of problems. But they're like a tray that the rack with the angles already predetermined, and then you mount your panels to them, but they have concrete blocks that fit into this tray, and the concrete blocks are what hold everything in place. And that's referred to the ballast as a ballasted system. There's dozens and dozens of these kind of engineered systems. So I would talk to the guys at Iron Ridge just to see how much that adds to the cost, because it is going to be a little more expensive than a flush to roof system, but probably similar to what a ground mounted system would cost. So not that much out of line. The other issue is with commercial systems, remember there are different setbacks from the edges. It's depending on the size of the roof, you've got to have at least a 4-foot setback around the perimeter for walkways, and then you've got to have roof access. In the textbook, it's all of that is detailed. So
okay,
and
what page is that on your new textbook?
yeah, I've got it memorized just that well. Yeah. But there are other issues like you can't have, I don't know what size this roof is, but if it's a really big system, you can't have sections of the array bigger than, I think it's like 100 feet by 100 feet. You have to break it up into with aisleways, with 4-foot aisleways between these sections. So those are some of the issues that you've got to deal with.
So would that be under racking system in your book?
Yeah, I think it is in chapter 9, the installation of the balance of systems.
How do you spell that?
You want to make sure the roof structural limitations too for loads.
Yeah, usually with industrial, that's not going to be a problem because they like drive forklifts up there and stuff like that. But you'll check.
System.
Yeah, also they usually have some sort of underlayment that you'll put underneath the system. And that keeps these things, because they do vibrate and shift a little bit. You don't want them wearing a hole through the waterproofing membrane that's on the roof. So they have almost like a heavy paper cardboard kind of underlayment that you set the rack on top of that keeps it from chafing and over the years rubbing through that waterproofing. So lots of little issues like that, but it's actually in many ways an easier system to install. The other issue is going to be about inner row shading, because you are basically putting little racks, but they're usually set aside. They are designed to give you the proper spacing. And when you get into these industrial rooftop systems as well, you'll also find that they have some east-west orientation systems in case you're trying to pack more things on. So what that is like a pyramid shape racking system with one panel facing that way and the other panel facing that way, but they're oriented to the east and the west, not to the south and the north. That allows for more of an even generation throughout the day of solar gain, but it also allows you to basically cover the whole roof without having to worry about inner row shading, which is nice if you're trying to maximize your coverage, but it's a pain in the butt if you have to try and get in and work on it because there's nowhere to step. You got to be removing panels as you go. And one of the other issues with those is they tend to be pretty low profile and there's not a lot of room in there for wire management. So you've got to worry about that, getting the wires up off the deck. And oftentimes with those industrial roofs, you might get puddling of water, so if you're getting water puddling and getting up into the electrical or the electronics, that can be bad as well. So a few little things like that to worry about. So, but if you're getting into the commercial, you're starting to work with the big boys there, Bob. So, yeah, you're swimming with the dolphins.
So I got lucky. The crew that I showed you the picture of that put up the systems, they already have done quite a few industrials, and they've also done some industrial ground mounts. They are very versatile. They have a lot of hands-on experience on doing it. And so during the installs, I put on my helmet the term idiot on the front here so that nobody listens to me, because when I tell them to do something, they see the word idiot, they won't listen to me. And all I do is ask questions, and boy, do I learn a lot from these guys who just up there and they just really know their stuff.
Yeah.
No book learning.
Yeah, well, that's the best way, learn by doing. Of course, sometimes you cost your customers a little bit of money that way, but it's their money. So, you're learning, they're paying. So that's, but I wanted to bring up, because you're talking about business installs, a couple of incentives. I've started doing some assessments for the USDA, the Department of Agriculture. They have a REAP program. I forget what it stands for, renewable energy something. But just in case you're dealing with commercial clients, in addition to the federal tax credit of 26%, if these businesses are located in an agricultural area, and they usually define that as, outside of the municipal center, or if the municipal center has less than 50,000 people. So small towns qualify as ag. They can get a 25% grant from the Department of Agriculture to help pay for the system. And that includes the install. So that's just flat out money off the top. It's only available to commercial, not for residential. So, so some of these assessments, when I've been doing them for businesses, it's just amazing. When you add in, 25% grant from REAP, 26% tax credit from the government, well, right there, you're over 50% of the cost. Then if you talk about accelerated depreciation, because depending on their tax bracket, you can deduct 87% of the entire cost in the first year times their tax rate. So if they're paying corporate tax rate of like 21%, that can be a significant amount. So just with those three things, you're up to, you know, nearly 70% of the cost.
Yeah,
Is
2-year payback.
yeah. So
Did you see, they had a news alert, you know, a segment on this on Fox News. I'm sure you were watching it. It was on Fox News on
my
Friday.
television, if I had one, would always be tuned into Fox, right? Don?
You could probably go online and find the segment, but it was on like the 6 o'clock show on Fox News. It was about Mount Orab, so I'm wondering if they were targeting you because it was right outside Cincinnati. They were talking about this. They had a whole big segment on, you know, putting up the farmers are putting up industrial size arrays.
Yeah.
And they put both sides on, because, and this is one I'd never heard. One of the farmers got on there and said, I'd never do that because the land could never be returned to the way it was. They don't know what's going to happen here. And I'm thinking to myself, it's posts into the ground. You know, people have been doing concrete for centuries or millennia. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what they thought was going to happen, but they had a series of farmers who wouldn't do it because they didn't know if the land would ever be returned to how it was.
Well, and the land, that's ironic considering the land was never agricultural in the first place.
Yeah.
Well, these guys, I think these guys actually were farmers.
Right. I mean, prior to
way
the soil
back.
being tilled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the advantages, of course, of solar and wind is that if in fact the system goes away, you can pretty much restore your property back to as it was. I know that the wind turbines, of course, are a much bigger issue with farmers. And what they're finding is, aside from a bit of disruption during the initial construction, they end up with getting annual leases that average around $10,000 per year per turbine. And then they have access roads and things of that nature that are constructed on their property. So, you know, that's often helpful if you're wanting to get in and feed your cattle or whatever. So they're finding it to be a super good deal, you know, assuming they don't care about the aesthetics. If they have a problem with how farmers usually don't look at their land and think aesthetics, they think more like yield per acre and things like that.
That's more city people. That's the rich city people who consider
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so I think both solar and wind are really good options. With the solar, I would say a little less so, because it does basically preclude you from growing crops or grazing unless you really push those guys up in the air, which is not something the utility is going to want to do. So, and
the wind footprint is it's really quite small. They cultivate right up to within 100 feet of the turbine.
Yeah.
Of the pylon, the support.
Yeah, and I heard a Texas farmer talking about how his cattle tend to follow the shadow of the turbine around, and sit down, in the shade as the sun is moving, because there's like no other shade in the field. So there's not really a big downside for this. The biggest issue is, does your property abut transmission lines that can handle a utility scale tapping? And if you have a high powered tension line going through, you've got a pretty good asset as a farmer, because somebody's going to want to come in and feed into the grid, so that's a real asset there. So I wanted to bring that up. I also saw that this Pennsylvania, just somebody's introducing a community solar legislative action. That should be a big deal in Pennsylvania, allowing people to aggregate and join in a community solar program. There was some reports on January installs. And it's interesting because I mentioned last session that 2020 was the biggest year in solar yet. In fact, we saw a 47% increase in solar installations in 2020, even though there was COVID and all. Well, 2021 is higher than 2020 so far for the first month. That's all we've got is the January. But solar was up 23% over 2020 for January. Wind was up 6.6%. So between the two of them, solar now only accounts for 2.4% of our nation's electrical supply, and wind accounts for 8.6%. So between the two of them, we're up to 11, which is a lot, and it's not a lot in the scheme of things. Although 2.4%, 3 years ago it was 1%, so it's growing pretty rapidly. And it's interesting. I saw a statistic that kind of makes you wonder or see the power of compound interest or whatever. But they said if there's an emerging technology that is becoming dominant, when it hits 1% market penetration, it's doubled half the time, half as many times as it will take for it to become the dominant technology. So basically it had to double in installations X number of times, let's say 20 times to get to 1%. If it doubles another 20 times, it will become far and away the dominant technology. So because of the compounding of that. So I think we're well on the way. I had mentioned that Energy Gang podcast. They talk a lot about how the financial sector is just jumping on board big time with solar specifically, like companies, managers like BlackRock, BP, all of the banks are decarbonizing their investment portfolio. So rightly or wrongly, solar is the flavor of the month, and we're gonna see it become dominant.
So
Yeah.
let me, if I was in charge of a large gas company and I have maybe some vision,
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I also invest into solar and wind as far as the company is concerned? I mean, that would be
most of them are beginning to do that. Although it's hard for one industry to transition into its replacement because the corporate mindset is such that they just don't see the value there. It's hard to get out of these structural, institutionalized ideas. I always like to say if they could do it easily, then IBM would dominate the internet, and they clearly don't. But BP is doing just that, British Petroleum. They've announced they're going completely out of the oil business, and the new CEO has basically fired, everyone who disagrees with him. He's kind of stepped in and cleaning house and saying we're transitioning to a renewable portfolio. So we'll see how effectively they do that. But I guess in the global scheme of things, BP is a relatively small player in the world of fossil fuels. So if they didn't do that, they'd probably be swallowed up. But
what's interesting is also the big three car makers are moving more and more to electric cars.
Yeah.
Toyota, who started this 20 years ago and has a part of their motto to go into that, why aren't they getting into solar and stuff like that? And there's this one car company that is making cars and getting into the solar. Tesla,
yeah, we've heard of them.
Yeah, so that's sort of a paradigm right there that when you go renewable all the way. And
yeah, I think
big
Tesla may not be the best case study for that because they've had their problems with their own solar, but I think they mostly got into solar because they were wanting to sell their batteries. They're really looking at themselves as a battery company, and you got to sell solar to sell the batteries. So although I did see that they're now selling an inverter, so they're going to try and become the whole package solution. But when you talk about solar, and I did just see in the news Shell Oil is starting to put electric charging stations in all of their service stations. So they're moving to be part of the infrastructure solution to the electric vehicle. BP has announced they're doing the same. Chevron is moving slowly in that direction. So it may be in the not too distant, pardon?
Are they charging for it or is it free?
Oh, no, they'll be charging, I'm sure.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Yeah. And Exxon's CEO announced that he didn't see any reason for charging stations because they're just powered by coal anyway. So that's kind of the mindset that will keep Exxon from transitioning into the next generation. But in the world of electric vehicles, of course, there's a couple of issues we've been dealing with, which is range anxiety and charging time. So those are a couple of issues, but there's a new car out there called the Aptera, and it's one of those funky little cars. It's a three-wheeler, so I don't quite know how practical it is, but it looks cool. It looks really sharp, and the whole body is integrated with solar panels, little small cells that are built into the vehicle, and it has 1,000-mile range on a full charge. And
How many people?
oh, I'm sure only two. I mean,
Okay.
one, no, I bet two will fit in. It will go 150 miles on a 15-minute charge, which is pretty amazing. And if you leave it parked in the sun, it will actually in a day get 40-mile range just from the body absorbing solar. So not that everybody's going to go out and buy one of these Aptera. It was spelled A-P-T-E-R-A. And the price tag on it's $25,000, which is not bad. I mean, you pay that, I guess, for a big old BMW tricycle or something. I don't know. You see these people riding those things around. So so it seems like it's it's an idea. It's like a thing where you're starting to see when 1,000 miles on this kind of car becomes a thing, then 200 miles on a regular car is kind of a thing. There was another company called StoreDot that has a new charger that will get you 1,000-mile or 100-mile range in 5 minutes. So if you start seeing those kind of things put into these gas stations where you can pull in and for whatever they charge, let's say it's $2 to use the charger for 5 minutes and you get 100-mile range, that's some pretty good, it's like filling up your tank with gas. It'll get you home.
Did they say how much power that is? I mean, I'm just curious how many, kilowatt hours or whatever is getting put in for that amount?
They didn't in the article I saw. Obviously, it's going to be a DC fast charger, where they just really crank the amps in there. But I do know that with battery charging, it's the last 10% of the charge that takes like 90% of the time. So if you're not that concerned about topping off your battery, you can get some pretty substantial charging done in a relatively short period of time. And I think that's what we're going to start seeing more and more. As people mainstream electric vehicles, you're going to see these kind of short burst, limited charge service station kind of options where.
So do service stations, does the sun shine on service stations?
Only if they're good. Only if they're,
Can you put a battery on the side wall of a service station?
Well, I think most of those service stations, obviously, it would probably not be the best idea to go from battery to battery on your filling. You're going to have some losses. But my guess is, they're just doing power purchase agreements where their supply is from solar, whether it's on the premises or it's directed through, community solar type options. I know Shell has said that they're looking at all 100% renewable for their charging stations. So, but I would doubt that they're going to be installing solar at each of those gas stations. They're probably going to have a big utility scale array somewhere that they're just buying power from. So that'd be my guess there. And then the last thing I had to bring up before we get some folks, if you guys have some items, is I was doing an assessment and I was trying to figure out what's the difference in cost between putting in just a straight solar install, a grid-tied solar install, using SolarEdge, so micro or power optimizers and a fixed voltage inverter, versus building in battery backup into that system. And the reason for this is it was for a commercial system, and they're only open during the day. They're not open at night. It was an architectural firm. But it would be nice to have the use of their array if the grid goes down. The amount of storage was not that important. The real importance was to somehow convince the system that the grid is still up, even though it's not. So having a DC coupled system with a small battery bank seemed to be the appropriate solution, because they're not looking for 3 days of autonomy. They're really just looking for, I don't know, an hour of backup and the ability to keep using their array, throughout the day.
So Jay, is the battery essentially like a buffer there where it says, okay, solar's coming in, it might go up and down a little bit, but that keeps you a steady stream of power? Is that
what the inverter is looking for is a signal from the grid. And with these systems, the battery will essentially mimic that signal from the grid to tell the microinverters or to tell the power optimizers, yep, we're still operating. So otherwise it's going to do that anti-islanding and shut down. So you've got to have the interactive inverter where it has it has a relay, so it disconnects from the grid, but then it needs the battery to send the signal to the array to say keep operating.
To keep the rapid shutdown from going on?
No, the rapid shutdown triggers it triggers the relay, but then you're right. It then keeps it from the anti-islanding. Yeah, it keeps it going. So if you're only open during the day, that's kind of all you need, assuming that you're not in the middle of a horrific thunderstorm or something. But if you've got a little bit of battery, so that's kind of the idea there, where you could minimize some of the cost without, going full standalone mode like Vince and you, Don, are doing, where you've got your SolarEdge and you've got a bunch of batteries and you're saying, okay, I want to have 3 days of autonomy or whatever. All I'm going for is an hour, So the system I was looking at is just putting in a SolarEdge inverter as opposed to the SolarEdge inverter, because that's their one that integrates batteries. And then an LG Chem 9.8 kilowatt hour battery. So that's kind of a standard profile that I've seen out there. So I just wanted to get a sense of how much that would add to the cost. And when I added up all of this stuff, it actually surprised me a little bit because it wasn't as much as I would have guessed. The SolarEdge, apparently the largest one that they have is a 7.6 kilowatt hour or a KW inverter. So you can't get any bigger with the SolarEdge. That's the biggest one. That retails for around $3,400, whereas the equivalent SolarEdge 7.6 kW is about $1,800. So by having the capacity as a DC coupled, it adds about $1,600 to the inverter cost. Then you've got to buy an auto transformer, which is the relay that disconnects you from the grid and keeps everything hunky-dory. That's another $400. So we've just added $2,000 to the cost of the system. So that's really the added cost, then whatever the cost of the batteries are that you put in. The LG Chem runs about $6,400. So
Battery management in the inverter.
yes, yeah, that's all built in. As long as it's a 48-volt battery,
Right.
it should work.
Isn't the LG Chem's 200 volt, I think.
Or no, you're right. It's 400 volt. It's 400 volt. Yeah, but it is compatible with the SolarEdge inverter. So whatever it is, the inverter is going to handle it, which might be why they cost $1,600 more, because I can't imagine there's anything else in there that really is, except for a couple of connection points. So really, when I was looking at that, it added $8,400, which is basically $1 a watt more cost to the system, because that would be about an 8.4 kW array with a 7.6 kW inverter. So I found that interesting. So if you're just throwing out rough numbers, I think it's probably fair in today's market to say, if you just wanted to have that DC coupled option, it's going to throw about an extra $1 a watt onto the system for the minimum. So, and we're currently doing estimates that are in the neighborhood of 2.5 to 275 a watt for a grid tied system. Is that what you're bidding out, Bob, typically? Oh, you're still muted. Bob, you're muted.
Doing his best work.
Yeah.
So fine. So I'm talking to the owner of this industrial building, and I'm telling him what it's going to cost him versus what he's going to save. And the biggest thing he's concerned about is peak time charges that he has to do it. So I say, fine, I'll do a leveling like at about 70% down from that. So you should be down from that. He says, yeah, but I'm still going to have some peak time in there. What about batteries? At this point, I sort of go to my brain. Now I have to do all of the math that I missed out on in your class to figure out the batteries on this thing.
Yeah.
And so does it make sense to do batteries even though I'm pulling down 70%?
Yeah, you're talking about demand charges as opposed to time of use charge. Yeah, and that's a big deal for commercial properties. For those of you who aren't familiar with demand charges, it's basically many utilities, yours may be slightly different, but they'll take the highest volume, the highest kilowatts per hour rate of consumption that occurs in a 15-minute period over the course of the month, and they'll bill based on that higher volume rate. So for instance, if you have a big motor that kicks on for an hour once a month, it could like double the cost of your electricity versus if you use the same amount of electricity consistently over the course of the month. So their argument, the utilities argument is, look, we had to supply you with the infrastructure to pull in that volume, whether you used it for 15 minutes or you used it every day 24/7. It had to be built. So we're going to charge you for it. So what you can do is take batteries and then basically feed that load when it does kick in from your battery, and then recharge your battery over a consistent rate from the grid. At night or whatever, just to load level. So it basically smooths out that curve. Now you're saying that just by putting solar in, their peak loads are during the day when solar would be producing the most. So it's going to just automatically load level a bit.
Right.
But you can then augment that by simply incorporating some level of battery storage and have that monitoring load demand and making adjustments. And there are those systems out there that they have those little, I forget the name of it, but it looks like a little C, almost like an ammeter well, it is an ammeter of some sort that fits around the wires when you connect, and it reads how many amps are being drawn through.
Yeah.
And the system monitors that. And then if you're drawing above a certain set point, it would draw from the battery rather than the grid. And it will load level that automatically.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in major industrial companies looking at ways of dealing with this. So I'm prepared for this from that, but I can tell you that every place I tried, it's interesting that the amount that they save us in money is exactly the amount of money we have to pay them to put the system in.
Yeah, yeah.
So solar gets rid of that, you know.
Uh-huh.
So I know that Honeywell, we put a system in from Honeywell that would look for the peaks, and when they saw the peaks, they would shut things down. So you'll be right in the middle of an operation in the factory, and all of a sudden it shuts off.
Yeah.
And, or the air conditioner shuts off, or something shuts off. But with the batteries, you're not shutting things off. You're just filling in with the battery. So what I hear you saying is it makes sense to not only do the solar leveling that way, but also have the reserve for the batteries on that.
Yeah, maybe what I would do, just because of the state of battery technology, is design the system with product that will accept that battery in that way, but wait a little while before you actually have them install the batteries. Because if they wait 2 or 3 years, the batteries may be half the price that they are today, you know, and they may be better. Because battery costs are just plummeting in today's market. So, you know, as you're looking at your inverter options, as long as your system can incorporate these batteries, you don't necessarily need to put those batteries in right now. They can see how it's working just using the solar, knowing it's an option to do it in the future. On the converse of that, they may want to take the tax deduction right now, you know, get the 26% deduction for the batteries, plus a REAP grant if they're going for that. Although you're in Chicago, so you're probably, Chicago's not rural yet, is it? I just saw a story about everybody's leaving the cities, so maybe
Chicago does have incentives. I'm working on one right now where they've got property tax rebates or property tax reductions if you put in a solar array. We're putting one down by our plant.
Yeah. Well, they
Well,
also have, they have some PACE financing, you know, where you can get the thing financed through your local government, just put on your property tax. So there's
Well,
lots of options.
Well, I could tell you that.
And the options changed when the last election changed, so it became less good for us and better for the other friends.
Yeah.
For the people who got elected. But
Well, I can tell you that Chicago's going to hell, but it's not going rural. I can tell you that much.
It's going to hell, but not on a horse. Is that what you're saying?
But I can tell you that the cost for electricity downstate in rural areas is a lot higher than it is in Chicago.
Right.
So so I like the idea that they get a little bit more help out there because they actually are saving more to cost and produce electricity in rural areas.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Line
Now,
charges
Vince, did you want to share, or do you want me to share the pictures of your install?
Sure, if you want to do it, that'd be great. I don't have mine handy.
Okay, I think I'm gonna, Vince had just sent me an email.
And I actually, my wife's getting her first COVID shot in today, so gotta leave in shortly.
Okay. Yeah, we got our Johnson & Johnson. I know, Jay, you had told me that my new arthritis in my knees was perhaps caused by having had COVID. And I mean, it went away after a couple of days, so.
Yeah, which is quick, which, I mean, I can't know that, but I think basically you got the best of all worlds because you got it, didn't know it, and got boosted.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, so this is, I made the comment when you said this is using the proper 3-point climbing technique, right? OSHA approved for that. But all right. This is your solar. Can you guys see the image there?
Not yet.
Just
Huh.
looking at it, emails.
Yeah, we're looking at your email still.
Oh, that's weird.
Might have to go to whatever preview or whatever you're using.
Let's try it again. Yeah, apparently when I open it, it decides that it's a different thing.
There you go.
There you are. So that's your solar, which you guys all love. Is this your battery over here?
Yeah, yeah, that was fun getting it done into the basement.
You said that's a 500-pound thing?
Yeah, it was right around 500.
Yeah.
So build a little ramp and a winch and winch it down. Kind of fun.
I think it's easier just to build the house around it. You know,
Yeah,
just put it
Yeah.
there.
Blast the wall out.
Let's see if I can get a. Did that one change or did I have to go back and share it?
Not changed.
Okay.
So what is the size of the battery?
It's 18 and a half kilowatt hours.
Now is it a lead battery or is it a lithium? Is that all
It's
usable?
it's lithium iron phosphate, so it doesn't have the the environmental liabilities that the lithium cobalt does, and you can deep cycle it. I mean, you can, and it doesn't lose charge. It's just really stable. Doesn't have the flammability issues that, for example, the LG has, which is the lithium ion, similar to the Tesla, similar high voltage.
Do you lose anything by going to that kind of battery?
Slightly, I guess, slightly lower energy density, but you're talking about having a block of metal and other stuff in your basement, so it didn't really matter.
And you lose some money as well, right?
It
costs
wasn't. It was at per watt. It was almost the same as it was It was less than the LG
Okay. And what was the brand name on that?
Fortress, and it integrated really well with the SolarEdge.
Yeah, in that, I don't know, Don, did you attend that SolarEdge seminar?
Yeah,
I think
I
they
did.
were,
That Fortress was the one they were touting.
yeah, they profiled that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Can you guys see the array now? The
Yes.
full
Mhm.
array? So this is your array. So is yours a full standalone or you're grid integrated?
It's grid integrated. It's DC coupled grid integrated.
Okay. And then this is, let's see. Oh, this is the back of the building, which I thought was pretty cool to basically make your ground mounted array into a room, which.
I can't let my wife see that because she's already brought this exact thing up that she wanted to do with all three of the arrays.
Well, let me tell you, we decided to enclose it after the fact, so it was a huge amount of fussing to make everything work and fit, and also making using the panels as a waterproof, essentially waterproof roof. So I had to I got some butylene tape with aluminum on it, so it was UV resistant. I had to slice it up into 1 5/8 inch strips.
Oh, wow.
Put them on all the things. It's not really visible now, and it works really well, but it was just an additional issue. I had to wait for a warm day and then, put flashing up and stuff.
You're talking about basically putting these strips in the gaps between the panels?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think they make like they call them like T-gaskets or something like that. That's supposed to be designed for that function to just clip into place.
Yes, and if this is, like I said, this is like doing it backwards. So I was presented with a thing and then a new brilliant idea about enclosing it. So what do you do?
Is that a wooden deck that's there?
No, I attached with some more of those U-brackets, some rafters that were flush with the Iron Ridge connector rafters, and then just put in some locally milled pine and screwed it up in there, but it just had to, fit everything correctly.
So that's just like a fascia board on the side there
Yeah.
that I'm seeing? Okay. And that's the underside of the panel there,
That's
not
the underside
wood.
of the panel, and I left it so there's a big airspace with the flashing on top, so that it's still a big channel for airflow to keep the panels cool.
And it looks like you,
How big is that, 6 inches, or what is that?
Okay, so I'm sorry. I actually we have to go get our shots.
Okay.
We have an appointment. But anyway, thanks.
okay, I'll keep sharing your photos and we'll talk about you while you're gone.
All right.
So.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
like that. All right.
Okay,
Well,
but it
thanks.
looks like they've got the gasketed ends on the pipe, which is good to keep hornets and stuff from building.
Yeah, I actually got some end caps.
Yeah,
They're like $3 from McMaster or something.
yeah,
So, all right. Thanks.
Okay.
See you guys.
sure thing. And then there was just one more photo here. Inside. So this is the inside of that array. So clearly what they did is put slats here, which is nice. So it'll keep it all aerated so that the underside of the, well, it's got a roof in here, so I guess it doesn't really matter. It's quite a thing. His disconnects right there, his combiner box. I did ask him if they, put the solar in this location, but they did not. He said it's in their basement. So I guess if I had gone to all the trouble of building a building like that, I would have just put everything right there. But then again, you have to then deal with temperature control and all of that.
Jay, what does it give you to put the inverter out there instead of in the basement or something, or in the house?
Well, it's just a nice space for it. I mean, if you have it in the house, then you got to have a place in the house, but it really doesn't matter. As long as it's accessible,
Yeah.
that's the thing. I don't know what it really provides you in closing this other than a place to put your ladder, I mean, although my wife wants me to enclose ours because she says the goats then have a place to go when it's cold, but they have a barn. So I know I'd spend a lot of time enclosing it and then the goats would never go in there. So
My wife suggested it because she's afraid the deer are going to come start chewing on the any wires they can get loose.
that seems kind of unlikely. I mean,
I agree.
Deer are not really rodents, although they act like it sometimes, but
Squirrels will do that.
oh, for sure. Yeah.
We don't have a lot of squirrels out here. We have rabbits and deer.
Yeah, the rabbits aren't going to climb up to get at it, but the
No.
squirrels are the bane of solar installers. They will chew through those wires, and so you put those squirrel guards. Since we're touching on that, one little hint, if you're putting in a squirrel guard, I've seen some people, they make a nice mesh squirrel guard. It's like usually for a roof mounted system where it's offset by about 6 inches off the deck. So you just put this mesh cage around the outside perimeter to keep the squirrels from getting in underneath. So then some bright people say, you know what, it'd be a lot cheaper if I just went out and get 6-inch flashing and then just sheet metal screwed that thing into the side and made myself a little box, which, yeah, it's a lot cheaper. But what you've just done is create a solar oven that starts to cook your shingles that are underneath because they're not being properly vented. Any of your electronic devices that are under there, like your module level power electronics or your microinverters, they're going to be dealing in a very hot environment. They're not getting air cooled the way they're supposed to. So that's just a really bad idea of enclosing that. That's why the squirrel guards are just like screening.
One time I had an infestation of squirrels in my attic. And where they were coming in, I put in, first of all, chicken wire, and they chewed right through that. Then I went to a heavier one, they chewed right through that. They love to chew, you see.
Yeah.
I had to go to 1/8" iron expanded metal,
Mm,
and they couldn't get through that. So
Yeah.
I saw the ones that are on the market for squirrel guards, and they'll just chew right through that stuff. I can tell you right now from experience. So you got to go to expanded metal of a heavy grade, and it's probably cheaper too than buying it.
Yeah, I know that you can get that plaster lathing, that's
Yeah, right,
almost like
exactly.
razor wire when you're
Exactly.
working with it. It'll cut you up really good. But that stuff, I can't see a squirrel chewing through that.
No,
That
they can't.
stuff's,
That's what I used. That's what I used.
yeah, I've used that for varmint control too, because we've, like with our chickens, we get raccoons that'll just tear through stuff to try and get at the chickens. So using a really good heavy hardware cloth or that lathing works nicely. But again, with the raccoons, you got to bury it down about 2 feet into the ground because they'll just dig under it to get at it. Because you know what? They've got nothing else to do. They'll just spend all night digging and chewing.
I already have a couple of situations where raccoons go right through a roof, a house roof, just go right into the attic.
Really?
And
Yeah.
they love those enclosures you put underneath the solar panels too.
That's why I'm a good old redneck with a couple of guns, because people always ask me why I have guns, and it's like, because we've got raccoons, that's usually my job, directed by my vegan wife, to go out and kill those damn raccoons, So
We don't
So-
eat them.
no.
Yeah.
But it is actually, we live trap them, but then I've got to shoot them because it's illegal to move them once they're live trapped.
It
You
is?
know, Yeah, in the state of Ohio, you're not allowed to transport it to another location. You've got to just dispose of it. And there is a logic to that because the territories are such that if you did move a raccoon, you're probably condemning it to death anyway,
Mhm.
because they're so territorial that, it's better just to own the fact that you're killing the damn thing, So,
Well, I have to tell you, to use a 22 rifle here to take out vermin, we had 2 occasions in the area here that the person missed the vermin and hit a person another a few thousand yards down the road.
That's Chicago, though. Isn't that normal?
yeah.
No, only in the city. Only in the
Okay.
city. And you have to
Yeah.
hold the gun sideways, you see.
Yes.
So,
Well,
If I
I will
was-
tell you that the way I deal with it, it would be hard to miss because they're in a trap on the ground with me with a rifle pointing at the ground. So I do worry sometimes that it might ricochet, like hit part of the metal cage or something, but then the only one in danger would be me. So,
well,
I wish I knew that rule before because I'm the one who has to drive them out to the railroad tracks and let them go, someplace 10 miles down the road.
that's against
Oh,
the law
yeah.
here. That's against the law here.
I don't think it
Yeah.
is in Kentucky.
I've
Yeah.
decided to go with hand grenades. I mean, forget knives, guns, just
well,
hand
don't
grenades.
let Annie know that it's not against the law in Kentucky because she'll have me drive them down to Kentucky.
Drive down, just
and
drive
turn
across the
them
river.
loose.
That's
So I just as soon avoid that. Okay, well, we're coming near the end. Does anybody else, Jay, you've got something?
Well, and this doesn't have to be today, but back 15 minutes with the discussion about battery backup from the roofs, it occurred to me that situations that, like our congregation building that's getting expanded, if we had 8 or 9 months of the year where we would store energy in the day because we're not going to get paid more than a pittance for putting it back in the grid, and run the heat exchangers through the night. And then in the December, January, February, where we have to worry about power cutoff and pipes freezing, and the sun's not so good anyways, flip a switch and make that into a reserve power capacity. Is that kind of dual purposing something that you've heard of anybody doing?
Yeah, there you're talking about, instead of like load shifting a couple of hours or a day, you're talking about seasonal load shifting, kind of. Is that where you're going with that?
Well, mostly that if you're in the summertime when you've got good solar and way more than we need for the building during the daytime, and not much risk if we lose power. I mean, other than a refrigerator or something, we're not really at risk. So we don't mind depleting the every day, charge it up and run it back down again. And then the part of the year where we need to worry about freezing pipes is also when the sun isn't so great and there might be snow on the roof.
Right. Well,
So I'm
I've
just
heard
figuring out.
there's been a lot of discussion out there in the industry really addressing that very issue. How do we deal with basically a seasonal shift where we've got abundance of solar energy in the summer, less abundance in the winter? How can we then take that energy and over a long period of time utilize it? And it doesn't have to be exclusively that, but that's one of these goals when you're talking grid level stuff. And that's interesting because battery technology is not really good at that because there is a certain amount of loss over time, the self-discharge issues. So they're really looking at flow batteries, which is one option, where it's a chemical translation and these things are almost infinitely scalable. And another one would be some sort of kinetic energy storage device. You know, we're almost thinking about the old alarm clocks. You wind them up and it will store it for however long until you tell it to go. They've got these new systems that actually, when you have excess power, they raise these large blocks up into a tower. And then when you need the power, they just use the gravity on these wires basically and use the power of gravity to then generate later. So I don't know of anything good that's on a scale like you're talking about for a single building at this moment, but at the utility level, there are some very interesting, like those towers that they're building, like compressed air storage. That's another item where you can compress the air, or elevated water storage, where you raise water and then drop it when you need it later. So I think we're going to see a lot of these kind of solutions evolving as we see a greater and greater penetration of solar, that we then say, okay, I want to somehow store the sun energy in the summer that we can use in December and January when it, you know, is less abundant. And those are usually going to be pretty large scale systems.
The local congressman, Jay, does that same thing. He's got, at his place, he's got a farm, and he does pump water up into a storage area for release later to try and regenerate.
Yeah, I could see that in your situation. You know, you say this is a church or whatever, integrating batteries from cars in the parking lot seems like a nice option, you know, to, especially since it's sort of a cooperative effort where you can say, hey, we're going to give you free power in the summer months, you know, to charge your batteries. Your bargain is you're going to maybe let us siphon off a bit of it in the winter time, you know, if we need it. I don't know. That's loosey-goosey. And we've also talked about problems with car battery warranties and things like that.
When I was a child, I used to play with Mickey Mouse and I would wind him up and then I would let go and then the energy would come back out again.
Yeah.
How about one big ass spring?
Yeah, well, they do have those kinetic energy storage devices. You know, that may not be the most efficient, but it's definitely an option. You know, that's anything that you can take excess storage. That's one of those areas where they're talking a lot about green hydrogen, where you can say, okay, even though the electrolysis process is not overly efficient from an energy standpoint, it's more efficient than just not capturing that energy. So let's take the electric energy that's available from solar, generate hydrogen, and then we can take that hydrogen and use it, because hydrogen, as long as it's stored properly, which we talked about is difficult, you can then, utilize that really any time. So
Well,
those
there is
are,
a system out there using that 60% efficiency now.
yeah, I'm still not 100% convinced about hydrogen. That's,
So would you go 80%? What's my
we'll
highest
see.
bid?
We'll see. I might,
Well-
if I were to bet money on it, I would bet that battery technology always will evolve faster than fuel cell technology. It will always be the better option. It's still the better option right now. I think what we're going to do is find that people develop batteries that don't self-discharge as much and are cheaper and more abundant than dealing with hydrogen.
And
The
there's an
fossil fuel
environmental
companies.
side to it too.
Yeah, well, fossil fuel loves hydrogen because now, once
Yeah.
again, you control the fuel supply. If we become a hydrogen economy, now there's somebody who needs to provide the hydrogen. And that is a model that they're very comfortable with.
That applies to lithium too. I mean, I heard on First Nation radio a report about a new standoff that's going on in Nevada, as far as a permit was granted on April 15th for an open pit strip mine of lithium in Nevada, and the indigenous people there and the environmentalists are trying to block it. It's going to
Yeah.
be like another Standing Rock.
Yeah,
But
lithium,
also on the good side of that too, and also who was it, Musk or one of those guys, basically was bragging that that they coup countries like Bolivia, which fell back in his face because the original leadership came back, the indigenous leadership.
oh,
And lithium's I just really question lithium because it's a huge it's a mining operation. They're calling it green too. They're greenwashing it, saying it's a green project because they're mining lithium, because they're making batteries for cars. But also there's a lot of research right now going on with hemp. But as far as making batteries out of hemp. And they're saying that the story. I put a couple of links up there, one on the protest and one about hemp batteries.
yeah.
So there's I think the technology is just exploding, to tell the truth. So
There's got to be some jokes about high leg voltage and things like that with hemp. But
Also, hemp acid
Lifetime
battery.
magazine.
hemp acid, yeah. Hemp oil. Yeah, I think lithium is very problematic. And, I think this is something we need to acknowledge in the renewable energy industry, that anytime you get a technology to scale, it creates environmental problems. So we're already seeing that with lithium. We'll see it with silicon mining. We'll see it in all of these situations. Now, they may be less troublesome than the problem we're avoiding, but there's still a problem. So we need to continue to try and form our more perfect union, right? We'll keep working on it. Okay, well, we better close it out for today. Appreciate you guys all being here, and we'll see you all next week.
Yeah.
Next
All
week.
right, thanks, Jack.
Take care.
All right.